Hello and welcome to the Twilight European Network. As you've seen, we've had a number of programmes about the communicating the EU, as this is Ireland's 50th anniversary of joining in from 1972. And I'm delighted here to have Sean Butler. Sean is a strong advocate of Europe and in fact did run for an MEP's position when he was only 26. So first of all, Sean, maybe you'd like to tell the people who you are, you know, because there'll be a lot of people will be watching this that won't know who Sean is.
Yes, I'm Sean Butler. I was born and reared in Kilkenny City, and I've been an active member of the Labour Party since 1990. And I suppose I'm one of the lucky people in Ireland where I was born in 1972, so I'm a child of Europe, and I have grown up with Europe as our, I suppose, nearest neighbour and also an integral part of our lives. My college funds, or my college career was funded through the European Social Fund. And I suppose I have grown up watching a country change. And I, at 26, was lucky enough to be a candidate for the European Parliament. I worked with the Labour Party on the first Lisbon campaign. And I've always been a passionate supporter that Ireland has a key part to play in Europe, and also how we move forward in Europe. You know, when we joined the EEC, it was an economic community. Yeah. It was about free trade. Now Europe is about trade, it is about opportunities, but the whole social dynamic of Europe, about European integration. And now, I suppose, we don't see ourselves as a small island on the periphery of Europe. We see ourselves, as part of a much larger European project, but also we see ourselves as a nation of Europe. And I don't mean that as a border nation, I mean as a community where we cooperate, where we travel together. And I have also seen, I suppose, and Europe has been brilliant for this, the demographic change in Ireland. When I grew up, you know, someone coming from the UK may have been, you know, what we saw. There would have been a few Europeans living, but emigration was a big part of our lives. And as I grew up in the 80s, which was a pretty dark time in Ireland economically, we went to college thinking I'll get an education and really I'll end up, if I'm lucky, I'll end up in the UK. If I'm unlucky, I'll probably end up in, you know, South Boston or, you know, Lower Manhattan. But that's where we looked at.
And you've now got a very, very positive outlook on Europe, okay, and you believe Europe is good for the country. In 72, the Labour Party had a different viewpoint, didn't they? They weren't too keen on us going into Europe.
The Labour Party and the left in Ireland opposed joining the EEC. And the thought process, wrongly, but the thought process back then really was that we were entering a free market, open economic borders, and that small indigenous Irish companies would not be able to compete on a European level, and that we would see jobs being lost. We would see, you know, an economic hit to the country. So that's why the left opposed it. But as time went on, and I suppose we saw the more social dynamic coming out, the biggest supporters of the European project now are the European left. The Labour Party will be passionately pro-Europe. Europe has a long way to go in both the social side and the democratic side. There needs to be a lot more changes, but you know, we are on the right road. And I suppose when we see how Europe has been able to react, recently said to the Ukrainian crisis, we've been able to open our borders, take in our fellow Europeans and give them sanctuary. That's what happened to us as people back from the famine on. You know, we expected our neighbours to take us in. Now we're able to reciprocate. And Europe, our kids grow up now seeing Europe as a future. And we see how Ireland has changed. You know, I go back to my time in school. To have someone who was non-Irish in your class would have been unusual. Now we take it for granted. And it's a brilliant thing that we take other nationalities living side by side with us as run-of-the-mill. That's where we want to be.
And like, I mean, it is a great, you one of the things that you mentioned in your introduction is that at the age of 26, you ran for a position as an MEP. And it must have been unusual because it's probably even like Congress in America, that it's usually the elderly people that have gone through a TD and then suddenly they go to Europe as some people would call a retirement home. But I mean, like, you at the age of 26 took that step and tried to...
Yeah, and like traditionally Europe would have been people who have been through the Oireachtas. And I was probably the youngest candidate in that field in Leinster by maybe 25 years. But you must remember too, through growing up, how I saw Europe change. So when I went to college in 1990 and the European Social Fund was funding that, really the focus would have been on getting a good degree and going and leaving the country. In the space between, say, the early 90s and the mid to late 90s, Ireland changed dramatically. Now we were, starting to be a tiger economy. There was wealth in the country. Our young people were staying. And I suppose the focus then went from a apathy towards politics, because I wasn't going to stay. We weren't, as young people, we were thinking about where we were going. Now we were staying. And because we were staying, now we wanted to have a say in not alone our own community, but the wider European community. And I was in Labour Youth at the time, who really were focused on and we were involved in the Young European Socialists. So we were going to other European capitals. We were seeing how Europe was structured. And that was my passion, to go and run for the European Parliament, to actually bring forward the European dream and the European model.
Yeah, now the youngest MEP now, of course, is Maria Welch.
Yes. And
Maria, I have to say, is a great supporter of Twilight, and she has helped us in many ways and has addressed our conferences and all. So she has and again, maybe it's because she has that younger attitude and she understands the LGBTQI, she understands the Erasmus Plus program for young kids. And you mentioned about going to college, and it was the European Social Fund. There is fantastic opportunities out there, isn't there, to use your Erasmus Plus and all like that? Oh,
look, and I suppose it's what we now see is exchange programs through colleges, where and unfortunately the United Kingdom has left, but like we see our kids now, and they see nothing with going to Madrid, to going to Paris, to go to college, and coming over and back. I went to college in Carlow, which is now University of South East. And we had students coming from as far away as Athens.
Right.
And some of our students were going to, say, Le Havre in France. And it's that cultural dynamic that brings, that you're no longer, you're gone outside the parish, is what I would always say. You're now working on a parish that's the size of Europe. And it's that mind change that happens when you go and decide to look outside. And also it's the other cultures you experience. And to be sitting in a class with someone who, 6 months ago was living in Athens, who was living in Le Havre, and the difference they bring, and the difference that the dynamic that does. And also, when we look at it now, we look at travel so much different. So I give the example when I was growing up to my children, the Iron Curtain, that's history to them. Where, to me, in 1990, at home watching the Iron Curtain fall, the idea of, me in the late 80s deciding to go off to Warsaw for the weekend, it would have been unheard of. Now we think nothing of jumping on a flight, going to Poznan, going to Bucharest, which are amazing countries, amazing towns. And it's how that Europe was able to integrate that. And when you think of, in the early 90s, like the cultural change with the Iron Curtain falling and the European Union being there to support, to encourage, and also then to be able to integrate those countries in a peaceful manner, that was, I think it was amazing.
Like we say, you've mentioned about the exchange programs and like that. And in Ireland at the moment, I mean, do you think that we get the full advantage of it? Are we operating to our limit in the Erasmus Plus program? And the reason why I say that, if you go to the other European countries, which we do a lot, the municipal districts are driving it. They're driving it. Yeah. Where, unfortunately, I find in Ireland they're not as keen to push it, which I find a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge area of growth. And I suppose if I had my way, we would teach European language in primary school.
Right.
We would be teaching French or German or Spanish. And the Erasmus program and all those other programs to allow people mobility within Europe, like the opportunity that something like Erasmus gives you to travel. The idea of the European Union even paying for interrail cards or travel cards to allow young people travel. Like I would always say to young people, having travelled myself, if you really want to experience the world, pack a bag and go travelling, because you learn so much and then you bring that back into your own community. So are we gaining enough from Erasmus? Most certainly not. I think through local authorities, that's where it needs to come from. They need to encourage more travel. They need to encourage more people to exchange through cultural exchanges. In the past, I was involved with the community festival in Callan, and we had people, traveling from Germany to talk about economics. We had Croatian music groups coming. That level of social integration is far more progressive than you have at the interstate level. And that's where, particularly around young people and youth groups being able to mix. And I think, Brexit has really pulled that back because the UK would have been a port of call for Irish groups. So I think we've got to repivot now and look towards the mainland Europe of where we do. And the one drawback we have, I suppose, is language. We still are behind the curve on teaching languages to our young people, where we see language as a second level. If you look at European neighbours, they're teaching languages at creche level.
Yeah, because it was you've just mentioned languages. We in the Twilight Community Group, we create these charter friendship agreements, and they're usually with like-minded municipal districts to ourselves. Now, they're not connected to municipal districts here. This is something that we've developed ourselves because we work an awful lot with the embassies, and the embassies then tell us, look, we'd like you to work with this town. And we had one in Marne-le-Campion in France, and it's just bringing to teaching languages. I was in the school, and 6 and 7-year-olds were being taught basic English.
Yes.
Okay. And what we did is we went out to Bennett's Bridge, because I was conscious of the fact that a lot of programs take part in the city. So we went out to Bennett's Bridge, and we brought in a French teacher, and they were taught basic French, and then we organised an exchange that school came over with their basic English to meet our kids with the basic French. But that is something that should be done nationwide. I believe there should be funding set aside for that.
Oh, absolutely. And I also think that when you talk about youth groups, that's the real key to Europe. And the idea of youth exchange is fundamental. And I do think teaching a European language at primary school, at kindergarten level, if I'll call it that, and then allowing that to grow out. And it's a restriction that we've always had. And if you look at Irish businesses, we look towards the UK and then we look towards the US because it is...
They speak English.
They speak English. Where we have a massive market in the EU, but because we restrict ourselves quite often to the English language speaking, so we really need to, as a country and as a social group, to repivot ourselves and look towards European languages and look outside French, look at German, look at Spanish. And I suppose I'm lucky enough that through sport I have got to meet many European people. And I think the Eastern European people are great people. And if you watch them, they really do engage, but their ability to speak other languages. I mean, you meet some of the Polish community. They'll speak German, they'll speak Polish, they'll speak some Russian, the Ukrainian, but they're flipping from one language to the other. But I suppose then as an educational tool, because their mind is able to broaden that wide, it helps them educational.
It does. I mean, it gives them it kind of... how would you put it? It makes their mind more active, and it's something that you pick up one language and then you can transfer it to another language, and suddenly for your life you have 4 or 5 different languages. Now we've sent people to Turkey, we've sent them to Hungary, we went to Bihać where we did the migration in migration to integration program, and of course we have them all here. We've been in Poland, there's in France, and we also have connections in North Africa in Tisnet. But the reason why I bring that up, I mean, like, do you think that we maximise even our opportunities locally from Chamber of Commerce that could be doing so much more with chambers of commerce, like-minded businesses in Europe?
No, and I think we have been over-reliant on the English language speaking business, and we've been over-reliant on, say, the UK. So we've always looked at, if I'm a business and I want to expand, well, I'll just go to the UK. And yes, we're still there. But when you look at, say, the French market, the German market, you know, the opportunities we have there, and like you look at some, you know, the Glanbias of this world, huge multinational who have gone out and have engaged, and have engaged through, you know, the Irish links, but also, you know, brought in expertise to allow them operate in European markets. But I think the fundamental you come back to is that we need to do that at the lowest community group level. And it's trying to work up. It's much easier to work up and build that. And it's the building confidence to go out and make a mistake. And I think the advantage that inward emigration into Ireland has had is the widening the base in our primary schools and showing Irish children that, you know what, it's okay to speak other languages. It is okay to be able to flip between 4 or 5 languages, and it takes the mystique away. I mean, traditionally we always, you know, you went to secondary school, you learned French because it was the right thing to do. Where now, I mean, really, you know, we should be saying we should be teaching Polish because we have a huge Polish population. We can work out of it.
It's on the curriculum here now, and you get an extra £15 for doing it. We have Polish-speaking people doing the Irish Leaving Cert and getting £15 because they're doing it in a foreign language, you know. So
but the interesting thing is we've Polish people living in Irish, and their kids are learning Irish
and very good at it,
and are the best at it because mentally they're open to language, and learning, if you can learn a new language, then when you go to secondary school or college and you have to pick up a new topic or new thing, mentally you're open to do it. So I think, you know, as an emigrant country, we have been very well served by immigration into Ireland. It has opened our broadened our base, and I think we've been lucky, and that's a huge advantage of being a member of the EU.
Just coming near the end now, but we say, you hear some there's parties that might say, let's pull Ireland out of the EU. Do you think they've learned something by seeing what happened in the UK?
I think, unfortunately, there will always be a base that is what I call Eurosceptic.
Right.
And I find that base very funny because having worked on, say, the Lisbon Treaty, you know, you'll have people saying, oh, well, we can't give more sovereignty to Europe. We've got to keep our sovereignty.
Right.
And then in the next sentence, they'll say, well, Europe's not democratic. And like the challenge always is, well, if you don't want to give away more sovereignty, but you want it to be more democratic, so, you know, like we pool sovereignty. And the argument I always make against people who would want to, you know, the Irish exit party, you know, well, you're the ones who said that at Brexit, oh, Europe will blink and, you know, Ireland will have to give way. But when push came to shove, Europe did not blink, and the UK government was betting on Europe blinking. So our European partners showed social solidarity with us. And now we are in a much better place. So, you know, should Ireland leave? Absolutely not. I mean, you look at the most Eurosceptic country at the moment, say Hungary. Yet opinion polls are saying in Hungary that 80% plus want to remain in the EU. And quite often, Brexit has probably been the best thing that's happened to Europe because people can now say, you know what, it is not, you know, golden, green, grassy uplands, as Boris would have said out there. It's a whole different ball game. So should we stay in? Absolutely. I think the European project has been brilliant, but I do think we have some challenges, and those challenges are increasing social integration and building that from the social base through things like Erasmus Plus, building that you know, upwards and engaging more in Europe.
Just 2 extra questions. The first one is, you started in politics very young. You ran when you were 26. Is there enough young people engaged in politics, even locally or nationally? Have we enough, or are we relying on the same people the whole time? We often hear in Kilkenny, it's the same people that are re-elected. which there's no one else running. So it's
Yeah.
just, you know, have we enough young people?
No, we don't. And I suppose I got involved in the early 90s where there was bandwidth for young people. We weren't facing into, you know, crisis of housing. So you had the time to stop, to think, to, you know, maybe drink that pint, have that political discussion. Unfortunately now, I think a lot of young people are so focused on get a good college career, get a job, buy a house before house prices go crazy, that we don't stop and look. And it's a huge disadvantage for young people. And I'm not a young person anymore, but I think young people should get involved in politics because it stops and makes you question what is going on around you. Like, we have a housing crisis. We have a housing crisis because of political decisions that were taken to go on a certain model. And the old argument in the late 90s was it Boston or Berlin? Well, we chose Boston.
Right.
And now we live with the consequences of poor state regulation, low taxes, low inspections. If we had chosen Berlin, I think we'd have had it different. We lost that political debate. So if you keep ignoring politics and we keep going on the Boston model, young people are worse off.
Sean, you have a great grasp of the whole European concept, a great grasp of politics and great grasp of what we're trying to do. Will we ever see Sean's name on a ballot paper again?
No. Sean has
Definitely
no.
not.
Sean has actively retired from politics from a candidate. I still am involved in politics. I still am involved in helping political campaigns. Where I really am passionate about at the moment is kids and sport. I help train 3 Gaelic football teams, lady Gaelic football teams, and I could spend 12, 14 hours a week involved in training kids in sport. And I think what sport and politics does, but sport particularly, it allows people to integrate. I'm a passionate believer in social integration, but I think you got to walk the walk. And being out on a pitch, training kids, watching kids of every ethnic background and every social. Well, you know what? And I always say to people, when you're training football, you don't care where your centre forward comes from, or you don't care, you know, if your midfielder turned up in a Mercedes or they turned up in an 84 Lada. That's what, and that is where it strips. So back to the core of what community should be about. So no, I never will run again, but I do help candidates. But I think people should get involved in politics, and I think people should put their names on ballot papers, because that's how you change things.
Sean, it's been absolutely fascinating.
No,
and I'm sure we'll see you here again on some of the topics that we're doing. And we're glad you could come in to talk to us.
And I'm delighted to come in. And I suppose what I want to say is I think the whole Twilight project, it's a brilliant project.
Thank you.
And it really needs that extra level of support, because the more social integration we have, and it's easy to talk about social integration, but groups like Twilight and other groups out there, you walk the walk. And that's where it really happens, and that's where it really, you know, that's where achievement comes from.
Thank you very much, Sean, for coming in. And that's another part that will be in our documentaries on the communicating the EU and the fact that this is the 50th anniversary of Ireland joining the EEC. Thank you, and we look forward to talking to you again very soon.